everyone. Welcome to a brand new monthly podcast that does not have a name. We'll figure it out. We hope that you guys would be able to help us. I'm Alana Pierce. Does everyone else who's here want to introduce yourselves?
I'm Austin Wintory, and I'm the other A in our nameless Up and Atom, which I'm going to start advocating for.
You're lobbying for that so hard.
I do like Up and Atom. Yeah.
I'm Troy Baker. I'm the tea in this cocktail.
And I'm Mike, and I've got a terrible internet connection. And I'm the M.
Unless you're close to your router, then you're
I'm so
just
close to my
fine.
router right now. I can see it. I can see it. I'm unfortunately very far from the rest of you.
Okay, but this podcast, this whole thing is going to be us talking about all the media that we've experienced in any given month. And I thought it was a really cool idea because we all have very different backgrounds, but we're from the same industry. So I've been in games media for 10 years. Troy is a very prolific voice actor. Mike is a game director. And Austin is a composer. So we have very different fields within the same industry, and everyone's got a ton of experience on this podcast. So, let's prove that experience doesn't matter at all and make total fools of ourselves while talking about the things we've checked out this month.
Yes.
I think it's also worth some context that the birthing of this was our glorious New York Comic Con panel celebrating Mike Bithel's and company's John Wick Hex unveiling, and we discovered, hey, we all don't hate each other when we're talking about stuff, so that's exciting.
I think
Yeah, I was
trying
like,
to
we
keep
can't
us on
stop
task was
talking.
hardest. Yeah.
Yeah. Being a moderator of that panel was quite a challenge, but we pulled it off.
Apologies.
No. It was. Don't put the blame solely on yourself. It was the three of us going, oh, by the way, there's people out here. We're actually doing this in front of other people.
Yeah, I hated it so much. I asked the three of you if you would be willing to do a podcast. So here we are.
That just proves you hate yourself.
Yeah, the torture was fun. No, the whole podcast was the three of you being like, no, he's amazing. No, he's amazing. And I was like, all right, I guess we need a format for this. You guys could talk about how amazing you are for a whole hour a month. It'll be great.
You were like this is a group of guys we can absolutely destroy over a series of podcasts where they share their tastes, right?
Soon they'll
Everybody
hate each other.
I can break this
Oh, you
up.
think
I can
you love
ruin
each other?
this.
No, you don't. But I did want to first talk about, I don't know how many of you
Yes.
played it, jumping into it because I'm pretty obsessed with it, is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order.
Oh my god.
Okay, hold on. Before we get too far down this road,
We just started.
everybody needs to understand. Right, we just started, but I can already see in the gleaning of your eyes how excited you are to talk about it. Because Austin, I know you finished this.
Yeah. That's my
I-
one completed title this month, so I'm ready.
Right? As a dad, carving out time to sit down with controller in hand in front of TV and be able to complete a game has been very, very hard. I finally got to sit down and take some time. Modern Warfare is one thing I've been playing, but after everybody was just going crazy on the Twitters talking about Fallen Order, I was like, okay. Because I love, like, Force Unleashed was one of my best Star Wars experiences. So I was super excited about this game. I've just started, and I'll kick this off and I'll let it go to you guys since you have more experience playing it. But already it was incredibly intuitive. I was bought in 100%. I thought it did a great job of tutorializing me, world building, and dropping me into their kind of own bespoke timeline that they're doing. But I wish that I wasn't talking to you three and playing more of it right now. So
Wait, Troy, how much have you played? Just so that we don't get into anything you
I am just now. He's on the big train, basically the Uncharted 2 sequence. So we can call it
few
that,
of
right?
You're not wrong.
But it's on a train, and he's like, "Oh crap!" He's like suspended.
Okay, so you're still super
He's
early.
even doing the
Super,
Uncharted
super
quips
early.
as he goes up the train.
Yeah,
I think
I'm
it's
like
worth,
30 minutes in.
It's worth putting an asterisk that you said being a dad. I think it's like being a father aspiring to be a good father, because I think it would have been very easy to just say, you go away. I have Fallen Order to attend to for the next 25 hours.
If I were a dad, fuck that kid. I'd be fine.
The thing with kids you've got to give kids their freedom. You've got to give them space to grow on their own. You can't, take over too much. It's really
Exactly.
important. Yeah.
The thing is
play more Star
not
Wars.
the thing is not so much like I have to watch him. He wants. I love this already because he already wants to be involved. So if I've moved from I still have a setup in like my studio, so I can play games in my studio, but to kind of be not so isolationist, I have a setup in the living room, so I have a tendency to play in the living room. So if he's still awake, he wants to be right next to me watching. And so it's just a lot of like flashing colors and lights and things hitting a 18-month-old is probably not too good for his development.
I mean, they're
But
going to have to
that's
learn
my-
about lightsaber colors at one age. I don't see.
You don't want red, green or blue.
Yeah, exactly. I was always ever since Knights of the Old Republic, I could never resist the yellow lightsabers. I always thought that was
Or
just
purple
the
if you're
coolest
Mace
thing.
Windu.
Purple would be my go-to, but I've been swapping between in this game. I guess Troy, you wouldn't be at the customization options yet, but I swapped the color depending on what color my droid is, and then what color like poncho I'm wearing.
That's a
So I'm
lot
just
of
fully coordinated
lightsaber
all the
changing.
time. It is, but I gotta look cool.
So there's
I
an
don't know.
RPG element to this as well.
Oh, you've not even broken the surface.
It does have like full skill unlocks, like Dark Souls style skill unlocks you get at
Yeah.
bonfires. Like that's a whole part of this game. Yeah.
Yeah, I spent.
Yeah, you're not even at the point where the whole Metroidy, Dark Soulsiness of it all has kicked in, right? You're still playing Star Wars Uncharted, which is a
Yeah,
very good
I'm
game.
playing Star Wars
but then once that
Uncharted.
kind of turns up,
Here's the problem though. Like in Red Dead, I spent far too long on my clothes and my appearance. Like I looked like Pat Garrett walking around. And if anybody gets that reference, Young Guns too, I was the man in black. So if there's any, I'm almost obsessive compulsive when it comes to RPG stuff. Like I will kind of have a tendency to stay away because I'll spend far too long playing games that have that element to it and never actually play the game. It's like, this game is about me.
It's light. It's light. It stays out of
Okay.
your way. I
All
think
right.
it's like a dialogue scene in a Star Wars movie. It knows why you came there.
Okay.
and
Good,
it
good.
stays out of your way.
But where it does get intense is I finished one of the first worlds and it said that I'd only done like 38%. And I thought that I had done everything because you're unlocking new abilities as you go to new planets. It's kind of Zelda style. And yeah, it is very Metroidvania and the way the level design doubles you back on stuff. But sometimes you'll still miss a ton of stuff. Like I think I've missed tons of Force Echoes, which are just little hidden things you can find. So I'm
Have you guys,
having trouble not doing it.
Troy, Mike, and Alana, have you guys finished it? Am I the only one who's finished it, or do you guys also?
I haven't finished it.
I'm a ways into it, but I've not completed it.
Because the thing that, to me, it's strength, but also the thing that drives me crazy as like an OCD kind of gamer in the way that you're talking about, like Troy with the RPG stuff. I'm similar, but the thing that drives me insane, even though I like this about the game, but it's hitting me in my weakness, who just kind of wants to be done with it and get back to like my deadlines, is the fact that there will be areas, you'll come into an area that the storyline takes you to, but it's gated by a force power you don't have, and it knows that 5 hours later or 10 hours later in the story is the only time you're going to be able to actually get to that secret. So it's taunting you to know that it's there, because then when you leave, it says, like you said, 30% completed, because there's whole shit that's designed for you to be circling back to later. And that drives me crazy, because I have to do it. I have no avoidance of that. I must go back.
It's tough. I like that on, I think it's Bogano, the Jedi planet, the like hub planet that you have. I like it on that because then every time you're getting a new skill, you can just return to that really small planet and like test it out on the environment there. But in some of the others, I'm just choosing to not go back. I'm like, I'm just not going to do this, or this is going to be my whole life. There are too many video games to play. I don't know how I'm going to do it. It nags
It's
at you
true.
for sure.
It's fair.
But that's like a minor complaint that I have. Like, I really like this game. I think the first hour that Troy is currently playing through is so strong. Like, when I played through that first hour, I was like, oh my God, is this my game of the year? This is absolutely incredible. But then it is riddled with a bunch of technical issues. Like, the hitboxes is really bad. So I'm generally really good at games like this. And I was like, there is no way that I'm dying. I don't buy it. It's like, you're lying to me. There is no way this is my fault. So I recorded some of it and slowed it down. And there are really bad hitbox problems where something will hit you, but it was actually like 2 meters away, and then it'll just pull you into its basically its hit. So it has a bunch of
Right.
things that I hope get patched that are just over the course of the game. I don't know how long is it, Austin? 20 hours?
Well, because of my obsessive compulsive need to try to max out that shit that I shouldn't bother with, I think for me it came in around 25 hours, but you could definitely finish
sounds
it
about right.
faster than that.
Yeah, I feel like I'll probably end up doing about 15 to 20, but there's just like a bunch of small things that are over time wearing down on me a bit. Like, he just can't grab a rope to save his life.
He really can't. I mean, that gets. So, are you at a point where grabbing ropes has gotten less difficult?
A little, yeah. Yes.
Okay, so you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But yeah, it's one of those weird things with where I got to that point and realized, oh, so ropes were meant to be bad until this point, and it's that kind of, there's some weird stuff in there like that I think it definitely does suffer after it's left what we'll refer to as the Troy zone. It does kind of go into this. It goes into a point where I'd say for about 2 or 3 hours, it's actively trying to frustrate you so that you feel powerful and empowered later. And that's definitely like a game designer thing. I've definitely been guilty of that in my own games in the past, and I can see how that decision happened. But it is one of those ones. It's kind of like when someone recommends a TV show to you, and they're like, "Oh, it gets so good in season 2." And I think that's kind of, this game is a little guilty of that.
Like Final Fantasy 13, they're like, you just got to put in 40 hours and then the game's incredible. But this is not that long.
Exactly.
Well, we'll get
not
to
that amount
that.
of time.
I think we'll get to that discussion with Death Stranding in a minute because, the onboarding is a thing. Because I'm actually curious, Mike, to hear more of your perspective specifically through the lens of a designer. Because I felt that as a player, like being onboarded into things or tutorialized through skills, force powers, world navigation kind of stuff very deliberately one by one because they were going to be chaining them in cool ways later. But it felt very kind of I don't want to say inorganic because I'm loving it, I loved it, but it felt very sort of transparent, like this is what we're doing. This is very gamey. There's no aspiration to kind of immersion within the world of these things. Is that my
it's
newbie?
It's a tough decision to do that. Like in one, how much you do it. I think they narratively explain it nicely in this idea of he's kind of who the character is, who the protagonist is, what the backstory of that character is. Again, I'm going to avoid all that. But like, I think they do have some nice in-universe justification of why he's figuring it out as he goes along. That's fair enough. But yeah, it's a tricky one. It was something we had in John Wick. We had to figure out, like, how do we do a skill tree? Like, would players be okay with, like, John Wick not being able to reload his gun for the first level? Like, do you ease in? Because that's the thing with all of these skill trees.
Someday I'm going to be able to reload this gun so good, just like now.
Exactly. But that's the thing is, and I think I don't think players necessarily picked up on this, but the reason skill trees and RPG-like mechanics have kind of caught on so much, in AAA at least, is it's a really good way of breaking up your tutorial. You can kind of meter out stuff. If you were playing Spider-Man and you had all of the abilities in Spider-Man in the first level, it's overwhelming. How on earth do you kind of teach a player that? So it's not so much actually...
I always think they did it in Prototype. That game...
Prototype
weird deep cut, but it's so odd. They start you with everything from the start, and then they space it out really slowly throughout the game. And I feel like they had that problem, but had to be like, it's not cool enough from the get-go. We have to make it way cooler.
Force Unleashed was the same way. You start off as playing as Vader, and you're like, this is where I'm ultimately going to go. And then they strip you away from all of that. I love that feeling because you start off with this sense of
godlike
loss. Yeah. Well, yeah, you start off godlike. You're like, I have every freaking ability. And once you've tasted that, even if you just back it off 40%, you feel so incredibly challenged. So there's a greater sense of satisfaction. Kind of piggybacking off of what Austin said, Mike, it really for everybody, is it possible for you to just play a game without, like, Mike, you as a designer, writer, designer, kind of a programmer in some cases, but the
programmers would disagree with you, but I have released games I coded.
I mean, like,
whether or not I'm a programmer is a different question, but yeah.
But all of us have our kind of our matrix that we can kind of look at games. So when you sit down and you play a game like Fallen Order, are you able to just, I'm going to experience this thing at face value, the way that it was intended? Can you just look at this as impartially as the average consumer, or you kind of are you beyond that? Starting with Mike.
If it's good, I forget is the honest answer. I was playing Fallen Order for the first 5 or 6 hours. I was like, oh, this is a nice mid-budget Uncharted clone. Oh no, it's actually an interesting, like, Dark Souls mainstreamification kind of process. For about 6 hours, I was playing it very kind of academically and interested, and then it got good, and I stopped paying attention. I just started having fun. That's generally it for me. Is I'll play things in an analytical way until they're good enough that I forget that I've got this as a job. That's my answer.
I mean, I will always criticize everything that I play out of habit. I do it to movies as well. I can't see something and not criticize it, but I find that fun, so it doesn't detract for anything from me. But then I also am always like, what is this going to impact the industry? How is this going to impact future games? So yes, I always think about stuff that way, but I like that so much that it almost makes the experience better rather than worse.
Well, thank God for that, Alana, because I feel like you've, specifically relative to the three of us, you've like professionalized, analysis and all the things that we're talking about. You've made that a core part of your career, and so it seems like it puts you in an impossible position. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. In other words, that to tune out and just play like any other player, wouldn't that essentially be you? Like, wouldn't that be sort of lost work in some sense? Like you've now you're kind of, you'd have to go back and play it again essentially and kind of do all that again.
Yeah, I think, my biggest complaint about like reviewing games full time or whatever you want to call it is probably that I took a hobby that I had since I was like 4 years old, and I now feel like I have to do it constantly. I won't watch TV or movies because I'm like, I should be playing video games because I need to have played all the video games because I need to understand all of the video games. And so it's given me this constant sense of like needing to work. It's probably a feedback thing too. Like what you're talking about is that I constantly have to criticize stuff, and then that feels good because I feel like I'm doing my job. So that I'm obsessed with doing it. But I like it. People ask all the time if I ever get burnt out, and I'm like, if I did, I'd probably leave the industry. Like, I'm not even close to being burnt out on video games at this point, so I'm good.
Are you reviewing this podcast right now and planning another podcast in which
I was like,
there's a secondary video being made right now.
Austin's face keeps being blurred out by the auto blur. It's a real problem. 5 out of 10.
5 out of 10.
Why were the developers so lazy that they made Austin's background blurred?
Thanks,
if they just took pride in their work.
It's because he has so much depth.
By the way, you know that someone's going to be like, best podcast ever. 10 out of 10. Screen Rant said no.
But how about you, Austin? I mean, I'm a DJ, but that's the thing that I just do occasionally. Like, it's not a profession. But if I go to a club and I hear a bad DJ, it drives me nuts. I'll be like, he didn't even mix that. He actually just pressed play, and I can always tell. Do you have that with music and things? Like, if they're bad, does it completely ruin it for you? Or how much attention do you pay to a score?
It's the same. It's honestly the same answer as Mike. When things are great, you reach some point where you just are in it and you're no longer like analyzing it. And then if it's really, really great, the joy is going back and actually kind of digging in deeper and understanding it more and realizing like, holy shit, there's actually a whole gold mine of crap here I missed. I went into this game, to Fallen Order, I mean, very aware of the backstory on its music because it's written by 2 composer friends of mine. It was an interesting story because Gordy Habb he's become kind of EA's chosen one for all Star Wars related music. He was doing Battlefront 1 and 2, and he had worked on the Old Republic and for LucasArts, and had been around and done lots of this and had really perfected the sort of, I think it was the LA Times or somebody referred to it as John Williams B-sides, like managing to nail that aesthetic perfectly so that it sounds like it's somehow music that John Williams had written that we just had never heard before. So he was kind of the go-to guy on that for years leading up to this, but then also in tandem with that, Respawn has been working through the Titanfall series with a guy named Stephen Barton pretty loyally for the last number of years. And so it was like, well, we also need like 8+ hours of score, so we're just going to kind of throw it at both of you guys. And so they went into it having to kind of, match this kind of triangulation of their own sort of input and the fact that they're individually quite different composers from each other, but it also has to be super authentically Star Wars. Like, that was the thing. It wasn't, in contrast to Mandalorian, which is like, let's do something wildly different from the traditional John Williams thing. Let's do something that's super and traditional to the point of literally all done, Abbey Road, London Symphony, no expense spared, full on. And so I went in knowing all that had been going on for a while. And so I went in like very ready to consume the score, and to the point that it was like for the first few hours, I was that's kind of my primary motivator is I was like, I'm curious how they're going to handle this and that and this and seeing it. And then, at some point I was just playing it and like sitting there going, goddamn stormtrooper shouldn't be able to kill me that easily. And I'm like totally forgotten all about the score and everything else.
That's me, but with the fucking goats. I hate the fucking
The
goats.
Rams are brutal.
But like the little Rams, god damn. Anything in that game, I'm like, I'm good.
Yeah.
But as soon as I see one of those, I start sweating. I'm like, oh.
I feel like you guys are fucking with me right now.
No, we're not. It's a real thing.
And then the clowns come in, and then it's just chaos.
I did want to say to your point.
I actually want to ask Austin.
Oh, go ahead.
I want to ask Austin a music question. How do you feel? I genuinely can't stop thinking about how clever it is. The license track. There's like a Mongolian metal band who did. It's the song. I think they are literally Mongolian. The song at the start, and then it's in a fight later on.
Yeah.
And I just think that's so clever. Like hiring basically a band that fits into the Star Wars universe because most of your audience don't speak their language.
Mongolian, yeah.
And sounds just perfect.
Well, funny enough, so that was
really
the
good.
first question I had after playing the game. I called up Gordy and I said, "What's with that song at the beginning?" I said, "Was that licensed or was that written?" He said that band wrote that for the game.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah, it's not even licensed. Yeah.
Song. Okay.
Yeah.
I did want to say to your earlier point, Austin, that I feel like in terms of it feeling Star Wars-y, I feel like the whole game nails that. And that maybe is a weird thing to say, but like so many aspects of it that are... Well, I actually did hear that it was originally a lot more Dark Souls-y and that they scaled it back. I'm not sure why that decision was made, but it was probably that it's still EA. I mean, they give Respawn a lot of creative freedom, and Respawn this generation made incredible games like Apex Legends and Titanfall 2 are both amazing. Right. But I would guess it was like Dark Souls is still not quite mass audience. They sell extremely well, but I can see EA being like, no, that's too difficult, so maybe scale it back. And I feel like there's a lot of those elements in the game, but when it comes to the core of it, it still feels so Star Wars-y. All of the characters, the shipmates that you have, sorry, Troy, feel very Star Wars-y. The planets do, the cutscenes do. Like, I feel like they just nailed that vibe, and that's got to be really difficult. And working with Lucas.
It's inspiring. I wonder with the Dark Souls thing if that was also... I don't have any insider knowledge, but I wonder if part of that was actually Respawn coming to that, because I think one of the things I really respect Respawn for is their game feel and their design, and they clearly do a lot of really smart thinking about the player experience and around the design of interactions in general. And I definitely played it and felt like there was stuff that was being done to streamline and ease that game. Not in a kind of making games easy kind of sense, but just in terms of making it feel good. Other than the kind of the technical issues you mentioned, Alana. I think,
I still think we'll get patched. I feel like this game is like almost the thing that I'm like, I really like this game, but give it a couple of months and I feel like this game is going to be amazing, which is kind of a bummer. Yeah, I think so.
I think aesthetically what intrigues me about it is that it is this kind of, it exists in this middle space between the prequel and the original trilogy. And I think it reminded me a lot of Galaxy's Edge. They've done such a good job of kind of combining everyone's Star Wars. Like, it feels like a really interesting mashup, and kind of a lot of the architecture is this kind of older, a lot of the architecture is like pure kind of Star Wars retro. And then you have these kind of temple spaces that are very kind of prequel trilogy. And it feels like it's nailing kind of two very different aesthetics and bringing them together, which is really clever, really nice.
Yeah, I think it even goes farther than that, because that first planet, the kind of hub planet, it feels very much like Knights of the Old Republic to me. And
that's
so
true.
that
Yeah.
which that game takes place like 2,000 years before the movies or something like that. It's something wildly outside of the kind of mainstream canon of this stuff. And I love the way, like the fact that the very beginning of this is all the like clone trooper and clone Star Destroyer military stuff, that Salvage Planet. I think I have a soft spot for those little intermediary places within the story between the big events, and like exploring the fringes of that. It's the same with Mandalorian. Like let's look at kind of the piles of rubble around these big explosions that our movies are based around. And to me, that was an amazing choice from them of where to pit this, where they could tell their own story, but yet it like the more kind of the deeper nerd you are in Star Wars kind of fictional lore, the more the game offers you, which is pretty. There's even a Yaddle name drop, like the background female Yoda on the Jedi Council in Phantom Menace is Yaddle, and they make some comment in one of the extra dialogues, like, "Are you talking about Yoda?" "No, I'm talking about Yaddle." And I was like, "Oh man, this was made by my kind of people."
That also feels really intentionally related to Mandalorian. No one's ever mentioned Yaddle in the past decade. Not one time. No. And now we're like, well, now you're talking about it. I get that. It does feel really cohesive right now, but it is also crazy that I'm more excited about every episode of Mandalorian and more excited about playing Jedi Fallen Order than I am about the fact that there's a fucking Star Wars movie just about to come out. I keep forgetting.
Right, I'm in the same boat. Like, suddenly
Weird.
I'm a Star Wars fan, and it's weird.
Yeah.
Were you not
purely because of those two things being awesome?
Mike, were you not like coming into this, were you not a big Star Wars nerd?
I was a Star Wars fan in the same way as I like other movies. Like, they are just a movie franchise. Like, I've seen every Star Wars
So
film.
in other words, no, you're
good.
not a Star Wars fan.
No.
You just like pop culture.
I just like movies. Like, they were just
Yeah.
films. Like, that's the thing is, and that's such a weird thing to say about Star Wars. But yeah, they were fun films. I went and saw them in the cinema and had a nice time. But no, it's exactly as Alana said. Like, Mandalorian and Fallen Order, suddenly there's Star Wars that I'm excited by and interested in that world. And what's nice is, because Star Wars is just so all-encompassing and permeates everything, I know the backstory. I know the world. I know enough just through osmosis that's without watching you don't need to watch every movie religiously, because pop culture is just going to keep regurgitating everything anyway. It's cool.
There is an element, though, now that we're so far removed first from the first three movies, but we're also even removed from the prequels. And there are people that are coming in that The Mandalorian or this game could be their first foray into this. Mm-hmm. So I think that for those of us that grew up with this, and some of us who literally grew up with all of it, my first movie, I think, was seeing this in the theater. I don't remember it because I would have been a year old. But I've been with this from the very inception of it, and watched as it's, like you said, permeated throughout our culture, and it is at the very foundation of pop culture. But there are people who were not even born when the prequels came out that are now they're now experiencing this. And it's interesting to see the disparity between someone who is in their 30s or 40s watching Star Wars going, I can't believe this thing is finally ending, and someone else going, well, they just started doing these movies. I understand there was movies done in the 70s, but it's like, what saga? It's like, this is the third. We have prequels all the time. And like, this is the same culture that would have experienced Harry Potter and like all 30 movies of those with Lord of the Rings, so there were these, 12 movie franchises. So to a lot of people, this is not that big of a deal, but there wasn't this before in our culture. We didn't have the only serialized movies that we had were Bond films. Like they just kept cranking those out. And then there were kind of the Rocky movies, there were Rambos, but we didn't really have a lot of sequels and franchises.
Alien, I guess.
No,
Alien,
but even then, all of those are after. Rocky is 76, I think, or 78 maybe.
77.
Well, okay, well,
But it
Star
won the
Wars,
Oscar in 77.
A New
right?
Hope is 77 also, but like
77.
Alien
Yeah.
is for sure 79. And also the Bond films are more like an anthology series. Each film is kind of a
True.
one-off with vague connective tissue to the other films. So I agree. These were an anomaly. Plus, on top of that, one of my favorite little trivia things with Star Wars
Godfather.
is that, yeah, but even then, that's also like around the same year or two. Like
Yeah.
it's all kind of.
And there are only two of them. We don't talk about the rest.
Um,
Definitely only two films.
But what's brilliant about this is George Lucas and Spielberg completely tricked all of us, because about 20 years before Star Wars, it was only serialized movies. Like the idea, like they brought this back, but like I listened to weird things. I was listening to a history of the Sherlock Holmes franchise, and like by the 60s, it was like Sherlock Holmes versus the Nazis, because they'd run out of Sherlock Holmes to make movies of. Like the
Abbott and
Sherlock
Costello,
Holmes,
same thing, right?
Albert and Costello, yeah, exactly. All of this stuff is historically there. What Lucas and Spielberg did with Indiana Jones and Star Wars was they reinvented this beautifully and brought back that serialized stuff. And it's interesting that serialized structure seems to be something that has generational gaps, right? Because now we're in the Marvel universe, right? So there's these waves of it happening, and that's interesting that we kind of forget about serialized movies, then they come back, then they go again, and kind of.
The thing that bothers me, though, is it's almost like Kiss doing a farewell tour, right? Like they're on their third farewell tour, maybe fifth. And in some ways, you could kind of compare Kiss with Star Trek or with Star Wars, because
watch it.
Yeah, well, yeah, we can get down that fucking rabbit hole if we want to. But here is this band that you're not going to look at Kiss and go, "Wow, those are great musicians," right? But what they did for music is they ushered in this element. They picked up where David Bowie left off, and they took glam and brought it into metal, and they spawned this entire genre of this big theatrical. Alice Cooper and Kiss created this whole theater of music and brought it back to or it was a calling back to what music used to be with opera, and now here it is presented in this incredible new pop culture framework. But Star Wars has been kind of the same thing. If you want to break down from this is not Fellini. You're not going to look at this and go, look at this cinematography, it's just the scope and the epicness of what they did, and how much the single boom that has continued to have a ripple effect throughout culture, both video games, TV, film, literature. It just continues to grow, and there's no stopping it now.
Especially now it's Disney.
Especially
now
that
all
it's
the money
Disney.
in the world.
But this is the thing, you're like, the saga will end. No, it won't, because there's 3 shows on TV. They're going to constantly do this. Have we lost the feeling of what it means for something to end, and for it to finally be like, we're putting a period on the end of this. We're closing the book. Because Marvel's doing the same thing. It's like Endgame, kind of. We're going to continue to do like all of these different
Endgame until next month when Spider-Man comes out.
Right.
I mean, it was literally, and then I love how the opening scene of Spider-Man makes super light of like this world-altering event that would have traumatized everyone for all of history, and they're like,
that was
remember
the thing,
that
wasn't it?"
hilarious thing? Yeah, like, I mean, they have to do it out of necessity. But.
We've kind of homogenized what it means to end something, because it's just kind of everything is perpetual. So I don't know how people feel about, like you said, you're more excited about The Mandalorian, you're more excited about this game than you are. Regardless, when I saw the trailer for the first time for Rise of Skywalker, I still was like, oh, like there's some really big scenes in there. The hug to Leia got me. Even like Finn's like big, like, whoa, there's something that it has the ability to still rally me as a kid from the 70s and 80s, that it hits to my very, very soul. But that's me growing up. I don't know if there are people out there now that can have the same appreciation for this, because they haven't had 4 decades of this.
I mean, I don't feel like I grew up
conclude.
with Star Wars, but I think knowing the significance on its impact on pop culture and on the film industry has made me appreciate it a whole lot. I mean, I watched the movies when I was a kid, but then didn't for a really long time again until maybe 5 years ago. But I still, like, I see a Star Destroyer come out of the ocean in that trailer, and I'm like, damn, that's cool.
Damn, right?
But it's for the most part, I don't feel like I did grow up with I'm not 4 decades old, so definitely didn't have that experience. But I think Star Wars is like, the conversation people are having right now is with Solo coming out. Has it lost magic because it is being serialized? Is it less special now? Does that take away from Star Wars? Skywalker's tickets sales are currently less than any of the new movies. I don't know what any of it means. All I know is I love Mandalorian. Which is like, I don't know what the impact on the staying power of Star Wars is going forward. I feel like it's probably such a rich universe with so much lore that it's like there's so many things to pull from is ultimately the thing. And no matter what, my thing is I fully appreciate what George Lucas did for the film industry. Like, he changed a lot of stuff through this space fantasy vessel with ILM and everything they did. He just changed so many
exactly.
things.
If only technologically. I mean, the Star Wars, the highest grossing sci-fi of all time prior to Star Wars was 2001, which was almost a decade earlier, and it made like $15 million or something in the box office. And Star Wars in 1977 dollars made like $300 million domestically.
When the Star Wars came out, it was the highest grossing film of all time. I had no idea. That's nuts.
It's still very near the top when you adjust for inflation, because it was like this thing where every theater, multiplexes didn't exist like they do now, so it would be the theater with the one screen, and they just showed it for like a year because it just kept selling out over and over and over. It's crazy. But I say, as someone who is a pretty lifelong, like, diehard Star Wars nerd, who, I've been like mildly heartbroken over the sequel trilogy, because to me it felt like it just took it in a direction that felt so far. It felt very lowest common denominator. It felt so off of what makes Star Wars. And I hate to sound like that fan.
I agree. I totally agree. Like, I couldn't help but make a snarky comment about the most recent trailer where they're like, they fly now. Like, you have to say that 3 times. It has to be. And that's not what Star Wars used to be. That's like them trying to be very Marvel and formulaic, and I think that's probably part of where the fatigue has come off. To get into like Scorsese's comments, they are formulaic. They follow the same beats and have the same humor, and I feel the same way. But still, you pull a Star Destroyer out of some water, I'm very excited about.
Well, so that's where, for me, like that's where this, like what Troy was saying a second ago about, there are kids especially who maybe their first entry point right now into Star Wars is something like The Mandalorian or Fallen Order. And as someone who has read a lot of the Star Wars, expanded universe books, and had played every game that's been released and seen all the movies a million times, and had every edition, every version of, like, when they would do a new trilogy box set, the Laserdisc remastered, the blah, 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 as the guy that obsessively had all those things, the idea that someone is experiencing Star Wars for the first time via either Fallen Order or Mandalorian is amazing to me, because it's like they're getting the real shit in my mind. When I see, if it would be like if your favorite movie ever was Bullet, and you're like, cool fast car movies are being exposed by Fast and the Furious.
Did everybody see Mike's face, by the way?
No one did. It's fine, Troy. It's fine.
It was just this, huh?
You get it though, right? Like, if Bullet is your favorite movie ever and Fast and the Furious is like someone's introduction to car movies, they're probably not going to end up at Bullet. But that's where it's like, if Mandalorian is your entry into Star Wars, you'll probably watch the originals and be like, fuck, this is amazing.
Okay, but building off of that, if you were to go and watch, if you're first like, okay, let's watch car chase movies, right? And you started off with Fast and Furious, but you don't understand that Fast and Furious is built off of Bullet and French Connection and Ronin and all of these classic, like, you have to see these seminal cinematic car chases, and you go backwards. It's like someone is like, hey, you should try cocaine. And then, like, after doing all of the cocaine, just like, well, maybe you should smoke a cigarette. You're like, that means nothing to me. It's the sense of what
I don't know if you're agreeing with me or not with this analogy.
I think that someone, it's like, it's too much. There's too much sugar in the sweets that we have now, as opposed to just we overload stuff with flavor, and I think that's the. I went in and watched the second. What was the second final call? Whatever we're calling it, sequel called. What was it? The one that just came out.
The Last
Last
Jedi.
Jedi?
Last Jedi.
Last Jedi. Thank you. There's too many titles. Sorry. I went in after the first one. It was like, I'm just going to let this wash over me. I'm gonna take whatever they give me. Flying Leia, absolutely great. Why not? It didn't bother me, and I loved the moment with Luke. I thought that was a great send off to one of the best characters out of the franchise. I was totally fine with everything, and everything came out. I was like, it didn't do what I wanted it to do, and I think that was the fear that it was made in. Was it just didn't trust itself. It didn't, it felt like, oh, we have to overcompensate now for the prequels. We have to wrap this thing up, and we have to make sure that everybody thinks this is the greatest thing ever. Oh shit, look what Marvel's doing. Oh God. And it was just piling on stuff. When you look back to the first 3 movies and they go, we don't know, man. We're just some little, like you said, space fantasy that's being shot in the middle of Tunisia that is introducing a whole new language and type of characters and building a world. It had nothing to do with spectacle and having to wrap up everything. It's the same problem that Game of Thrones had. It's like, how in the world do you put a button and a bow on what literally changed the face of television, a series that changed the face of television? And I think that they just didn't trust themselves. And that happens with games as well. When games are designed and developed, and Mike, you know this, when they don't trust, when that's the critical element, they can have the best design, which they won't if they don't trust, where they have the best music, which they won't if they don't trust, best performances. Someone like Alana is going to find it and cut it to ribbons because you feel the lack of trust in it.
I feel personally attacked by this. I don't,
Why?
I'm sorry you didn't like Quarantine Circular, okay, Troy? Jesus.
I love Subsurface Circular, by the way. To me, that was something that trusted itself because it wasn't trying to do anything. It was just like, what happens if I do this? How do you feel about this? Yes, we're here to make you blush.
Well, I do want to say that.
I think that might. Sorry, go on, Alana.
Yeah, well, because there's a slight delay, we talk over each other. I think one of the issues with The Last Jedi is the amount of criticism The Force Awakens got for being too similar to A New Hope. So they were like, let's make it completely different. And my biggest issue with that movie is that it's bad improv. I feel like what The Last Jedi does that I really don't like is just completely ignores everything the film before set up in a way that you're like, it just doesn't do any yes and. It's no, but it's like, oh, let's kill all of them. So now I'm at this point where I'm not super excited about a new Star Wars movie because I feel like I don't have a lot of stakes. I feel like I don't really... There hasn't been something built up throughout the course of 2 films. There was one film, and then the other film presented me with a bunch of completely different stuff, and now I'm like, I don't know what you want me to care about, but I still like the space battles. But that's part of why Fallen Order, I really wanted to make the point of how Star Warsy it feels. And obviously, it's totally an opinion. What you take from Star Wars is one of the coolest things about it, is it lets you take whatever you want. But I feel like Fallen Order is very Star Warsy and has the essence of what I like about Star Wars, whereas I felt like the new trilogy of films has not done that. And then Mandalorian's something different entirely. It feels Star Warsy in that there are a lot of weird aliens, but it's also basically a Western.
Yeah, I think
the Sergio Leone aspect of it is... Go ahead,
you
Mike.
You could take Troy's angle. I actually kind of like that as a way of thinking about these things. The idea of stuff that's not trying to be something else, that has faith in an idea. Because I think Fallen Order is very much trying to do something brave and interesting with the IP. I think Mandalorian is just kind of unapologetically like a 90s Western TV show. That's what I love about Mandalorian is I think there's been a lot of conversation about how cinematic it is. I love how TV it is. Yeah, Mandalorian just feels like the stuff I loved as a kid watching on TV. Like it's not embarrassed to be a TV show, Mandalorian. It's paced. It feels like Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, and I love it.
How cute's that baby, though?
That's what the internet's there for mainly, right? That's what the internet's there mainly.
Well, we have spent a lot of time just now talking about Star Wars. We probably could have done this whole thing. I don't know what time we started.
A new Star Wars
I
podcast.
pretty
feel
much
like this first episode is 100%.
It makes
there's
sense.
40 years and as Austin put it, just a litany of source material.
Finally,
which that was an interesting comment. Who was it that was that Kathleen Kennedy that made it think us we're not sure what's going to happen with Star Wars movies because there's no more source material, and I'm like, what are you talking about? There is a veritable
most source
fountain,
material.
the most source material. I said, there's more source material for Star Wars than there is the Bible.
Yeah.
Way more. But I feel like talking about this specifically, it deserves its own little one shot, its own little episode.
Actually, also, I want to jump off of.
God damn it, Wintry, go ahead.
I know.
Actually,
But I want to springboard off a thing you were talking about a minute ago, Troy, when you were saying about things not trusting themselves, because that's huge for me. I would so much rather watch a show or a movie or play a game or listen to an album that fails utterly in its complete conviction in itself.
Yes.
Than something that's all cynically like, this is what people love.
Right.
And it got me well, first off, we never heard from you if you're able to play things without analyzing performance or the caliber of the because I do want to hear.
How do you feel about Cal?
Yeah, I want to hear your take on that. But that's not what I was going to say. So I'm keeping my browser tab.
You only get one question, Austin.
No,
That's it.
I do
off
the
the
same
island.
thing. If something is bad, especially from a performance standpoint, it's going to stand out to me, and it's going to. I'm not going to think as there's less happening under the hood with a performance, right? It's in your face. That's what's being presented to you versus Mike's able to look at it and the design and go, oh, because they were deving this in Unreal, I know what their limitations were. And so I can see what they're doing. And there's literally a matrix that someone who has experience coding, programming, designing is able to see that the average consumer is not. If it's a bad performance, you don't go, well, I don't know what's happening. You're like, you see it, it's face value.
But aren't there bad performances where it was like a direction that was leaning out of the strengths of the actor? I mean, doesn't it happen?
You will never know. I will never know. You as a viewer will never know if the reason why you saw a bad performance was because of the director or because of the actor. There's a body of work that stands behind some actors that you're like, whoa, they're normally really, really good. But this director must have or there's so much that can be done in editing. There's so much that you put the wrong camera angle on somebody and it completely changes the story.
Question.
So, yeah.
Why the hell do you think they picked Hayden Christensen for Anakin?
There is something in.
Good eyebrow stare.
Have you ever? Well, you laugh, but I mean, have you ever seen Hayden in person?
No.
Okay.
No. He doesn't come round anymore. Just won't come round.
Burbank isn't on his stop list either, as it turns out.
People can hate this, but I've been around Hayden a few times, and I don't know him. We're not friends. I've just been around him a few times, and if I were casting that movie and Hayden Christensen walked in, I 100% would cast him.
He's got the right look for sure. In terms of
he does.
Yeah. He does this thing when he smiles. You look at him and you're like, he's so meek and meek. He's impressive. His stature, like he and I are eye to eye. He's a very tall guy. But when you look at him and he smiles, there is this. You see someone smiling, but on the back half, he has this not put on broodiness. It's like a James Dean look where you can smile, but there's pain in those eyes. And I think that George Lucas looked at that and said, I need to see this character in transition because we go super saccharine sweet with little Annie, and I need to see how this person becomes Darth Vader. And I can 100% see, and if you've seen subsequent stuff with Hayden Christensen, he's a good actor. Oh, yeah. He's a really, really good actor. And I see his smile turn to like evil like that. So I get why he was cast. I think that Hayden Christensen was the hood ornament of a train that was just destined to fail.
The script's terrible, but like you watch Natalie Portman and you're like, no, she put in the work. She does a good job.
She always does, though. She always does.
Even then, though, I think it's probably hands down the weakest I've ever seen Natalie Portman too, which is why I think it points to the direction more than the performer, that's why I asked. And that's
It's
I say
also
that armchair directing, like as if I could do it. Obviously, not at all.
I think that purportedly, as I understand it, you're not. George Lucas is a film director, right? Martin Scorsese is a director in the sense that he will get into characters and he really loves to work with his actors. George Lucas has no heart. He is great at story building. He's great at giving you character archetypes, and he's great at cinematically setting this up. But Steven Spielberg was always the one that was like working with the actors and really kind of digging in there. So that's why the two of them work so well together. But George Lucas isn't going to look. I remember them telling stories about him on set, and he was just like, don't ask me about what your motivation was. Don't ask me about what your intention is. I need you to stand there and move to there because I'm going to have, you can't see it right now, but there's this huge robot. He's setting up a shot as opposed to really building a scene. And I think when you have someone like Hayden, where you're not working, I've worked with actors on a mocap stage where you walk into this white room, this white padded room, and you're wearing this stupid suit and a helmet on your head and a camera right here. And you're like, okay, now what you can't see right now is you're standing in the middle of this blank and you're facing off with blank. And people are like, I don't know what to do because I'm used to these trappings and these accoutrements to making a movie or a TV show that I'm completely robbed of right now. And if you don't have a director that's making that actor feel safe, then that actor is coming from a place of fear as opposed to coming from a place of faith. And your performance will always fall flat and the audience will smell it. Somehow they won't connect with that character. They won't connect with that scene. Or most people will write off the movie as like, it just wasn't good. And they won't be able to tell you why.
It's funny because there are these noteworthy exceptions, like Alec Guinness in the original trilogy and Liam Neeson in The Phantom Menace, where they just do their thing. And it's
Right.
like they just kind of act circles around everybody else.
Sure.
And it's like, I guess they're
You
just
always find
immune.
that there are always actors who are more kind of, I guess, workman-like. Definitely, like, my experience directing actors, you have actors who really want you to walk them through every single choice, and you've got to be available to them for that. And then you also have actors who show up and want to read their lines, and they're fine. And with, frankly, those actors are often like an Alec Guinness, like of a caliber where you can just let them roll. And I've worked with both kinds of actors, and it's the director's role to kind of give an actor what they need.
That's
And
it.
yes, in some cases, like, obviously a director can't give an actor what they need, and that will always show up in the end point.
I don't think George Lucas, Star Wars is still his baby, but he didn't care that much about those movies narratively. He was just like, I just want to test out this tech. I want to make the first ever digital shot. Like, that was what his
Right.
goal was, and he changed the industry by doing that.
Sure.
And I get what that means, that people got bad scripts and bad performances, and Carrie Fisher wasn't there to help. So they were kind of
And we're all
screwed.
limited by that, right? We're all limited by our passions. We're all limited by what we actually care about. And that's true
motivations.
of, I think, every creative process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Austin, what was your
I
second
have
question that you left in the browser?
What'd you say?
What was the other question that you had left in your you had a tab?
My- God.
I have a question I was thinking of it beforehand that I was teasing you guys about. I was hinting at a kind of slightly provocative question that occurred to me while I was sitting in the airport in Mobile, Alabama last night.
Which is the weirdest sentence I've ever heard you say,
Yeah.
by the way.
In a long lineage of weird sentences, such as your pad thai is getting cold.
Oh, is it?
Oh, of course.
God, we're going to have to reorder that shit.
I was thinking to myself, and you set it up perfectly when we were talking about kind of authenticity versus not in these games, in these shows. How afraid are they to be themselves, regardless of what they're being measured against, and blah blah blah. Because last night, unrelated, without knowing you were going to bring that up, but kind of perfectly attuned to that, I was curious to ask you guys, within your particular professions, what do you think constitutes the biggest or the riskiest choice, the biggest risk, I was going to say, the riskiest choice that you can make? Do you understand what I'm at? Am I clear in my question? Because I think there's a lot of ways to do what we all individually do very safely, which can very quickly be a very cynical thing. Like, if I just do this, I'm not going to make waves, and probably it'll work out well, and it might find an audience, or blah, blah, blah. But what's the hard opposite of that? What's the riskiest thing that you think you can do?
My answers are all really uninteresting, I think, but it's, I remember I was one of the first people to play Mass Effect Andromeda, and everyone was very excited about it, and I walked out of the room after having played for 3 hours and had this moment where I was like, shit, I have to be the one to tell everyone that this game isn't very
Sucks.
good. Yeah, but it's crushing because, A, it sucks for the developers, but mostly I was like, I'm going to get destroyed because they aren't going to believe me because this is Mass Effect. And I was like, fuck, like I have to write about how bad this looks, how buggy it is, how bro-y I think the dialogue is, and it's just like this crushing feeling where the easy route would be like, Mass Effect Andromeda is amazing and you're all gonna love it, because that's the bias that people generally want to read from that kind of thing, but I couldn't do it. Had a really similar thing with No Man's Sky, and I still have all the comments saved where they were like, stupid bitch, fire her, and now I'm like, where are my goddamn apologies for that launch? They love that game now. And obviously the other one is not pissing off publishers, but yeah, I feel like with journalism, it's just being honest is unfortunately sometimes the riskiest path. But if you don't do it, you're not really a journalist. So that's.
But there's been validation for that. I would think, like it's like No Man's Sky you mentioned specifically. Like I assume. Have you ever failed that? Have you ever thought, shit, this is. I don't feel right being completely transparent or completely open, and then it you pay the price
I've always
for it?
been completely honest, but I have also sometimes like think I've changed my mind about something later. I gave Superhot, just the original game, a 7.5, and I'm like, that was such a mistake. That's I think the only review score that I was like, that was way too low. I don't know what I was doing, and my logic was that the game doesn't evolve throughout. I think it's 5 hours when it wasn't in VR, and it's also clearly designed for VR, so it's a little bit different when you're playing it. It was just on PC at the time. It was like, it doesn't actually add anything new. It's just the same thing with slightly more enemies, and it doesn't evolve enough. It was like, does that really matter when the game's really fun? But I've never not been honest in something. That would be a nightmare.
This is a problem that I think we have pervasively throughout the industry, where as we head into award season for games, especially, there's no criterion, and people forget that it's subjective. This is my opinion. It's my take on it. There's no on the Truder scale of whatever. You can't quantify your opinion. Something that you said, Alana. I read a quote that I really loved. Speaking about being a journalist, which is very relevant to our culture right now. The quote says, "If someone says it's raining and another person says it's dry, it's not your job to quote them both. Your job is to look out the fucking window and find out which is true." And I think that right now, you having your opinion on this and go, most people can't say here's why and give you a critical analysis of why they think it's a 7.5 or why Andromeda is bad. They're just like, I just didn't like it. It didn't satisfy something within me, as opposed to, here is a standard for cinematography. Here is a standard for dialogue. Here's a standard for design. Here's a standard for this. You being able to look at it and go, it really never iterated upon itself. It just kind of threw different enemies at you.
Same enemies. Those
Same
big
enemies.
Red crystal boys.
Yeah. Fun mechanic that never changes. They just kind of go, well, now you're using shuriken. Now you're using a bottle. Now you're using guns. I think that's a valid point, but I hate awards because they don't. I'm dovetailing off of your question, Austin, but
Don't worry, I'm still going to hold you accountable.
And all of us have at some point been in contention for some award, and it doesn't. Mike, I think it impacts you the most, because if
I'm an egotist.
True, that's why.
This is all an intervention, actually.
Yeah. If I don't get an award, I'm like, I'm still going to go get drunk at the BAFTA party, right? If you don't, if the three of us don't get an award, but if Bithell Games doesn't get to put Game of the Year, there are bonuses that are not triggered. There's an opportunity for remarketing and repackaging that game that allows for more revenue to be brought in, or probably more likely, there's a chance for that game the sequel to not be made, and you have to start all over from an IP. So I understand and now we've got Golden Joysticks, we've got BAFTAs, we've got Game Awards, we've got all of these different awards that people can now say Game of the Year, but we don't have the standard. Here is the boom. This is the definitive Game of the Year. And now all the Game Awards have gone to most anticipated game. That to me skews the voting for what the actual true Game of the Year is that people's jobs are kind of depending on.
Yeah, I mean, it's a shame. It's a shame. I don't think that's a fair amount of pressure to put on the journalistic establishment, to be honest.
No, I can't think about that. Like when
it sucks. It's a stupid,
right.
Like it's something. Obviously, as a game developer who releases games relatively regularly, I get to encounter. I've got friends who hate specific games I've made. And that's fine, and it's not a thing. And I think what's also really interesting is if you make something, I'm trying to think of the word, consistent or well thought out. If you make something that's just terrible, you'll read 20 reviews that all pick on, have different problems with it. This is terrible, this is terrible, this is terrible. If you make something that's consistent and, quote unquote, competently made, you'll get the same review 20 times and you'll just get to see the subjective difference in how much people care about certain things. And that's kind of interesting. You almost do get to an objective truth. The problem is the review score or the assumption that, there's any kind of metric to how good something is. I think reviews are fantastic and they're useful, and for both the audience and for the people who make games. But it is bullshit that anyone's basing any kind of payment or future plans on any of this stuff. Awards are nonsense. The trick with awards is to know they're nonsense when you're winning them as well. That's the thing I think people struggle with. It's very easy to kind of get very excited when you make something that is a bit of a darling that year. So yeah,
it doesn't change.
I don't think it's fair. I don't think it's fair for journalists to have to even think about any of this stuff. I think it sucks that situation has been produced often by people who don't have taste and rely on outsourcing it to other people.
It's marketing execs. You can't
True.
think about that at all when it comes to voting of any kind.
Right,
but it's also, I do want to say, I think, I don't like review scores, and I feel like virtually every other games journalist I know doesn't like review scores, but the audience likes them so much. They'll complain about them, but there are so much evidence that they will look at a review score and ignore everything else that to get rid of them would hurt outlets more than help them. But I would love to get rid of them.
There's
burn them to the ground.
There's a weird thing as well where the critics that are often very good, a lot of the very good critics are the ones who've been able to get the review score no longer to be part of the process. So I'll often find that the best reviews, and I mean best reviews in terms of the most useful and interesting ones, not the ones that like it most, but the best reviews are often the ones without scores, which is very weird as a game developer to
right.
Because obviously you're watching Metacritic on launch day and you're paying attention to all this stuff. It's interesting that you often find the better written reviews and the more interesting ones are usually the ones that don't have scores nowadays.
It's probably because the others are written to justify the score. So you have to be like, 100%. Okay, hey, this is probably what my score is going to be. This whole thing has to be written to lead to that.
For me, yeah.
Well, and also it does this. It's like no one's going to really click on a review that's an 85 or an 87. But they're going to click on that 38. They're going to click on that 65. And most people won't even do a 100. It's the problem is we want to see the dirty. Ooh, what did you find terrible about it? We won't even we'll save Death Stranding for a different podcast, but
the lowest Death Stranding score, the site
38.
that published it, Survivor, it crashed the site. They got so much traffic. It's basically an independent site in Australia. I know the guy who runs the site, and it crashed because it got so much traffic.
Yeah.
It's nuts.
What did they give it? What score was it?
38, wasn't it?
Yeah, 38.
No.
Yeah.
38.
That's amazing. I don't understand
there's no metrics for that. It's all, as Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius said, all is opinion. All is opinion. That's all this is. But sometimes for 4 people, those opinions are fascinating and compelling, aren't they?
Yeah.
I to your I have to quote very possibly my favorite film of all time, Troy, since you said
Hudson Hawk.
the negative.
Bullet.
As much as I wish I could say a Michael Kamen scored film is my favorite of all time, alas, no. I don't know. I'm not prepared to defend it truly as my all time, but it's definitely a candidate for it, which is Ratatouille. And it's just, to me, it's the best film made about passion. But the actual review that he writes at the end, Peter O'Toole's voicing of Anton Ego, I think speaks to the question I asked, but also to Troy, to your point about like there's a real incentive for negative. And I pulled up the quote to make sure I got it right, because I love it so much, where he says, "In many ways, the work of a critic is easy because we risk very little and yet enjoy a position over those who offer up their work and their selves to our judgment. We thrive on negative criticism, which is fun to write and to read. But the bitter truth that we critics face is that in the grand scheme of things, the average piece of junk is probably more meaningful than our criticism designating it so."
Such a scene written by a creator, like that's like every Aaron Sorkin script. That is such that is such a line of like, I'm going to write a critic into my movie that is going to agree with me about critics.
Wow,
It's
what
amazing.
a beautiful.
And his transformation
someone got a bad
is the back
review
half
for
of the
their
quote.
student project.
The fact that he realizes that his real job in this story is to defend the new, to defend the original, and that actually can be quite a big risk. It's the flip side of what you said, Alana, about if something is extremely hyped, there's incentive to pour all this love onto it. But I would you tell me if this is true, but it seems like the opposite, like in this quote, is absolutely the case. Like if there's something everybody's hating, and the kind of the bandwagon has spoken, but you think it's being, something redeeming has been missed, or it's somehow great.
Yeah, so I've done that too.
There's an obligation to defend it.
Always, but they still get mad. So like I wrote this piece that I just repeatedly honed in on about how, I'm forgetting what it's called now, the EA program that Unravel came out of.
Originals.
Yes, EA Originals is like, EA Originals is actually really good because aside from Unravel, actually, they retain the IP and make all of profits. So EA will basically cover their own costs, but not actually take any money beyond that, which is why A Way Out was extremely profitable for that guy. It's like, it's very good for indies, but even writing that, I said something positive about EA, so I'm a shill and I deserve to die. And that's like one of the most difficult parts of it, is that you have to manage the fact that you can write something and think that it's honest, but nobody will remember it. So they'll get mad at you at the time, but then when the thing comes out and you were right, nobody's like, you were right, and I didn't buy that because you said that, or I listened to you and I went in with certain expectations. They just shit on you and then completely forget that it ever happened. Or you do it the other way around, you're just accused of being paid off. So I don't think the audience realizes how against honesty they actually are, but if I weren't being honest, my job would be completely pointless. Why would I be doing it?
I think the riskiest thing that the four of us can be, to answer your question, Austin, is to do everything regardless of how it will be received, but knowing that it will be received, and to do so honestly. It's Alana, it's you writing an article that says Andromeda just is critically, it's not good. Objectively speaking, it has these flaws. Austin, it's you writing a score that doesn't do the 1-4-5 and sounds what we really want, kind of like a Hans Zimmer thing. It's you doing that. And Mike, it's you basically doing every game that you've ever made, which is, this is the game that I can make, and this is the game that I will make.
I just want to be very clear. I think it's well structured. I think the speakers are very smart. I think I'm sure the comments will reflect that. I think it's going really well.
It's going very, very well for me. I have some pad thai that, as Austin has informed me, is getting cold, and I am ravenous with hunger.
I think we have done a full hour as well. We did not talk about anything but Star Wars and now criticism. Our bad.
This is now a Star Wars podcast.
But there was a lot of Star Wars out this month.
It's a part one, dude. We got Death Stranding to get into. We've got Stadia. We've got a whole bunch of stuff.
I have to get further. I've not got to you yet, Troy, so I don't know how far I am in that game. I probably need to play more before we talk.
I think you have to play for 17 days straight. I think I come in around hour
Isn't 17 days
659.
straight just get me through the first cutscene, though? That's what
Yeah.
that's a little preview of my opinion so far.
All right, before Troy's pad thai gets cold,
Yes.
thank you for tuning in to episode 1, everyone. We'll be doing this, well, it'll be live the last Friday of every month. Basically, this is the format. I don't want it to be very scripted. I don't want us to have to follow anything strict, but we'll just talk about the stuff that we're either thinking about or playing or watching in any given month. Yeah, I can leave a comment just asking people what they want us to name it, but I guess this is a pilot, so we'll figure all that stuff out. It'll be great. Where can everyone find each of you?
I think
if
it
they're
should be
not
called
familiar
Blur
with
the
your work?
Background.
Blurred background.
Blood background.
I'm a Wintry
Weirdly
everywhere except on
disappearing is the
Instagram because someone
podcast,
stole
yeah.
that and apparently doesn't violate the terms of their user agreement that they have to give it back to me. So I'm a.wintry on Instagram for the occasional posting there.
Twitter is Troy Baker VA, Insta official Troy Baker.
Twitter's the only place I'm ever active, and honestly far too active. At Mike Bithell, full name, yeah.
All right, and you're on my YouTube channel, so that will all be in the description below. I will link out to everyone's stuff. We did it!
We did.
Episode 1, help
It's
us find
done.
a name of whatever this show is. Up and Adam, maybe.
The Not Star Wars podcast.
We'll still talk about Star Wars next month because that motherfucking movie's coming out.
Well, and there's more Mandalorian episodes. So this is going to
True
be
story.